The Deputy Attorney General has just been accused of hiding an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, and not just any investigation, one into allegations of drugs and money laundering. Not only are we going to get into the explosive back and forth playing out over claims of a cover-up, but we also got our hands on the very document in question. The document itself, a very revealing DOJ memo regarding a probe into the deceased financier. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, before we go any further, got to tell you about Proof Wallets, our sponsor, okay? Because I started hearing about them, like the best wallet ever. I'm here to tell you, I understand. I understand why all this hype is real. First of all, I love this. Proof Wallets, veteran-owned. It's a veteran-owned company built by craftsmen who take pride in what they make, and it shows. Look how well they're designed. Also, super secure. Not only are they RFID blocking, but they also hold up to 25 cards without feeling bulky or like anything's gonna slip and get lost. The craftsmanship, that's obvious, but what really separates Proof is how they treat their customers. Did your wallet get damaged or stolen? They're gonna replace it for free. You can even customize it with images, text, logos, anything you want. So go to go.carryproof.com/sidebar, order yours today, use code SIDEBAR for 20% off your entire order today. That is code SIDEBAR for 20% off. All right, so we have this big accusation on our hands when it comes to the handling of the Epstein files, okay? We have Senator Ron Wyden, ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, who has accused Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche of blocking the release of a critical memo seemingly showing that Jeffrey Epstein was under investigation by a task force that specializes in drugs and money laundering and prostitution operations. We have the memo. We're going to go over what it says. A lot of it is redacted, but we get a good sense of it. But let me just show you this war that has been happening. Full public view. So Wyden apparently sent a letter to Blanche on March 18th, and I'm going to read it all for you. It says, quote, "Dear Deputy Attorney General Blanche, it has come to my attention that you are preventing the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, from producing an unredacted copy of a report I requested regarding drug trafficking and money laundering by Jeffrey Epstein and several associates. By withholding this unclassified document from the U.S. Congress, you are covering up for pedophiles and obstructing my investigation into the financing of Epstein's criminal sex trafficking organization. For years now, I have been conducting an investigation into the so-called tax planning conducted by Epstein to finance his criminal sex trafficking organization." And by the way, that's because Epstein was this like financial advisor to a lot of wealthy and influential people, but it always became a question, what was he doing? How was he being financed? What was he using the money for? As part of this investigation, I'm following the money and examining the extent to which Epstein was able to utilize the U.S. financial system to make thousands of suspicious wire transfers and cash withdrawals for the apparent purpose of trafficking women and girls. As you are aware, on February 25th, I requested an unredacted copy of a memorandum prepared in 2015 by the director of the DEA's Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force's OCDETF related to Operation Chain Reaction. Operation Chain Reaction was a major investigation by the DEA's elite OCDETF task force into drug trafficking, prostitution, and money laundering by Epstein's criminal organization. As you're also aware, the fact that Epstein was under investigation by OCDETF is a serious matter. OCDETF, which the Trump administration recently dismantled, was a premier task force set up to identify, disrupt, and dismantle major organized crime and drug trafficking operations. OCDETF worked with partners across federal agencies to conduct sophisticated investigations into transnational organized crime and money laundering. OCDETF frequently targeted dangerous drug cartels, the Russian mafia, and violent gangs moving fentanyl and weapons across international borders. According to the heavily redacted version of this 69-page memorandum, which was recently unsealed by the U.S. Department of Justice in response to the passage of Epstein Files Transparency Act, Epstein and 14 other individuals and entities were being investigated for their involvement in illegitimate wire transfers, which were tied to illicit drug and/or prostitution activities occurring in the U.S. Virgin Islands and New York City. Public reports also indicate that Operation Chain Reaction found reason to believe that Epstein was involved in illicit funding and distribution of so-called club drugs, including ecstasy, ketamine, methamphetamines. Ketamine is often used to facilitate date rape by being slipped into beverages unbeknownst to victims of sexual assault. It is my understanding that shortly after I requested an unredacted copy of this OCDETF memorandum, DOJ stepped in to prevent DEA from complying with my request. According to a confidential tip received by my staff, DEA Administrator Terry Cole was ready to provide an unredacted copy of the memorandum, but you stepped in to prevent him from doing so. My staff inquired with the DEA about the status of the production of this document, and the DEA responded by directing questions to your office. Your alleged interference in this matter is highly disturbing, not just because it continues the DOJ's long-running obstruction of my investigation, but also because of your bizarrely favorable treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell, one of Epstein's closest criminal associates. That's because, remember, Blanche had an interview with Ghislaine Maxwell for quite some time, and then she was transferred to a different prison, right? That whole was she transferred to a cushy prison kind of thing? Did she provide information to Blanche? Remember, she didn't implicate President Trump in anything that Epstein was involved in or allegedly involved in. I should not have to explain the significance of the fact that Epstein was a target of an OCDETF task force investigation. It suggests the government had ample evidence indicating he was engaged in large-scale drug trafficking and prostitution as part of cross-border criminal conspiracy, and that Epstein was likely pumping his victims, including underage girls, with incapacitating drugs to facilitate abuse, which, by the way, we've heard those kind of allegations before. I am at a loss to understand why you are blocking further investigation of this matter. The excessive redactions of this memorandum related to chain reaction go well beyond the intent of the EFTA, which allows for redactions to protect the identity of victims not members of a criminal sex trafficking organization. Additionally, the document is clearly marked as unclassified at the top of every single page. There is absolutely no reason to withhold an unredacted version of this document from the U.S. Congress. In order to assist my investigation into this matter, I demand that you immediately authorize the release of this document. Now is not the time to cover up for Epstein and his network of criminal pedophiles and enablers. Accordingly, please provide a fully redacted copy of the May 18, 2015 memorandum prepared by the director of the OCDETF Fusion Center. Now, if you put this into context, we know that the DOJ, the administration, has come under a lot of fire, a lot of scrutiny, that there are materials that were redacted, that were not fully released, that the allegation is that they're covering something up, right? That they're covering up certain allegations. I did a whole sidebar on these unverified accusations against the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, and the idea of there was missing pages, there was missing interviews, and so this is another allegation that is in line with that narrative. By the way, Wyden followed up with a series of posts on X about this, calling it a stunning interference, reeks of a cover-up. And he told, by the way, CBS News back in February, it appears Epstein was involved in criminal activity that went way beyond pedophilia and sex trafficking, which makes it even more outrageous that Pam Bondi is sitting on several million unreleased files. And Wyden also wrote on X, huge. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, Trump's former personal lawyer, who was also responsible for Ghislaine Maxwell's transfer to a cushy Club Fed, has intervened to block the DEA from providing details of a mysterious Epstein investigation to my finance committee team. So then, guess what happened? Todd Blanche wrote back, posted on X. Huge, so he's basically making fun of Wyden. Huge, a sitting U.S. senator has completely fabricated a story for clicks. No one is blocking anything. This DEA report is available to members of Congress unredacted in our reading room. By the way, that's in relation to the fact that, yes, members of Congress are granted full access to unredacted files at DOJ headquarters. Always has been, of course, at Ron Wyden has never bothered to visit. So you're seeing two different narratives, back and forth allegations. Okay. We got this 69-page memo in the Epstein files. And yes, it is titled Chain Reaction. It is from the DOJ's Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force's Fusion Center to Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Special Operations Division. According to CBS News, this was set up back in the 1980s to fight drug trafficking. The Fusion Center was opened in 2009 as a way to kind of gather all of this information and have a place to share it between law enforcement agencies. So we're talking about a very secretive intelligence unit of the DEA and a task force that is fighting crime coming in from all different kinds of countries. Now, according to Bloomberg, this all began when an informant came forward with an allegation that Epstein was part of a club drug operation, right? I mentioned it before, ecstasy, ketamine, meth, and also, by the way, prostitution. And I should also tell you, Bloomberg reports that under this chain reaction operation, the feds went after a dozen people in New York, including members of the Genovese crime family, on racketeering, gambling, drug trafficking charges. So this is a big deal. But you go back to this memo, okay? Bloomberg reports that in 2015, the DEA requested that the OCDETF's Fusion Center create this target profile memo on Jeffrey Epstein, and also with respect to other individuals and businesses to potentially support a further investigation. Now, a lot of this memo, the one that we see, it is redacted, but Epstein is clearly visible. It says target profile Epstein. DEA reporting indicates the above individuals are involved in illegitimate wire transfers, which are tied to illicit drug and/or prostitution activities occurring in the U.S. Virgin Islands and New York City. CBS also reporting that its sources said the DEA wouldn't have even opened this or been a part of this unless there was some sort of narcotics connection. So you have Epstein, you have these 12, 14 individuals, 2 businesses, mostly redacted, although there has been some reporting on who these people and businesses could be. Couldn't independently verify it, but you can take a look if you want. It says target 4, Jeffrey Epstein, right? That's the focus. That's what we want to focus on. And you're only talking about financial reporting from 2010 through 2015. That's what's included in this report. And it says that Epstein was the subject of 7 unified suspicious activity reports. So 2015, 2014, 2013, totaling over $5.6 million. Now, financial institutions have to file these. They file these when they detect any evidence of potential illegal activity, money laundering, fraud, things like that. So usually FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, is a part of this. It's part of the Treasury Department. You'll also see in this memo currency transaction reports. This is when financial institutions have to file these when there's a cash transaction that exceeds $10,000 a day. A lot of this can be standard, a lot of it's pro forma. It doesn't always mean criminal activity, but just have to note it. But this memo says that the targets, including Jeffrey Epstein, are part of the following case. DEA, New York, there is a case number. It was opened in December 2010. The status was pending judicial, so it was an active investigation. There's a section that talks about a biographical identifying data of Jeffrey Epstein. They also talk about transactions that he was involved in, but also Epstein's guilty plea, right, back in Florida, solicitation of prostitution, procurement of a minor charges. But it seems, when you look at this, there was another investigation going on, and it was with ICE. Now, not entirely surprising when you think about that, as there was reporting that since 2009, so after Epstein pleaded guilty in Florida, you had the FBI, the Treasury Department, the State Department, the DEA, all looking into Epstein. So maybe not that surprising that you deal with ICE, but I mean, look at this passage. ICE reporting indicates Jeffrey Epstein pled guilty on June 30th, 2008 to state offenses relating to solicitation of prostitution and procurement of minors to engage in prostitution. In fact, by the way, under a linked investigation section, it seems there was an ICE investigation in Paris that was opened in June of 2013, closed that October. It was titled Operation Angel Watch. There was another one, Las Vegas, opened in 2009, closed in 2010. So you do wonder whether or not Epstein was under investigation for potentially harboring or transporting illegals, perhaps women, girls from other countries. But you look at all these agencies that are involved, DOJ, Secret Service, Customs and Border Protection. How about this? Harvard University Campus Police, Virgin Islands Police. The Harvard University, we know that Epstein has had a ton of connections there. They've come under fire for their affiliation with him and when they also ultimately cut off contact with him. There are certain transfers, wire transfers, financial transfers that were highlighted in this memo, like the Deutsche Bank transfers. By the way, Deutsche Bank came under a lot of fire too for seemingly continuing to provide services to Jeffrey Epstein, even after it said that it would stop. Apparently only closed his accounts after his arrest in 2019. You have a list of all of these accounts. There's a list of affiliated banks. But there's also companies that were connected to Epstein. So you have SLK Designs, LLC, Hyperion Air, which, by the way, I believe that was used as a holding company for Epstein's plane. CBS reports that SLK Design was headed up by 2 women that were part of Epstein's 2008 plea deal in Florida to those state charges. Remember, that was a way to avoid federal charges, and that they were named as co-conspirators. So you can see why this is all looking very shady. And CBS reported that those companies were set up by Epstein's attorney, Darren Indyke, who, by the way, as I'm recording this, is being questioned by the House Oversight Committee regarding his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. And this comes after Epstein's former accountant testified, Richard Kahn. So whenever we talk about financial transactions and Epstein, you know his name came up. Now, he came forward, and he hasn't been charged with a crime or anything like that, or directly implicated in a crime, as far as we can see. He told the committee he was not aware of the nature or extent of Epstein's abuse of so many women until after Epstein's death. He told the committee that he didn't see anything that suggested to me that Epstein was abusing or trafficking women or otherwise acting unlawfully. While Epstein was alive, I never observed any sexual abuse or trafficking of women and never received a complaint, either by one of Epstein's victims or anyone else, of such abuse or trafficking. However, it pains me to think, and I deeply regret, that I may have unknowingly assisted Epstein in any way. Okay, but going back to the memo for a second, you have this interesting part. It says redacted and Jeffrey Epstein are subjects together in a 2014 USAR. I mentioned those suspicious reports. FinCEN indicates redacted was Epstein's personal assistant and would act as a recruiter and facilitator for Epstein's illicit activities. Now, if you've been following us here on Sidebar, there's a lot of names that have come up regarding who those assistants or assistant could be. Remember, no one other than Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested or charged in connection with Epstein's purported sex trafficking operation or sex crimes. Yes, we've seen investigations and arrests abroad. Look at former Prince Andrew, but that's always been more about allegedly sharing secret confidential information, including with Epstein. But anyway, when we're looking at this document, it is significant. It seems by all accounts there was an active probe into Epstein on these other matters. And OCDETF gathered all of this information on him and others from all of these different federal agencies. You're talking a list of dozens of suspicious activity reports totaling $50 million in maybe questionable transactions. And you have combined 40 suspicious activity reports. They were sent to the Treasury Department's FinCEN, right, between 2010 and 2015. You have these 37 currency transaction reports between 2010 and 2014, totaling $1.2 million. So it all raises the question of what else could Jeffrey Epstein have been prosecuted for, and whether or not there are others to criminally charged. Although, if you've been following the latest news, at least from what we're hearing, it seems unlikely possibly that there's going to be further charges or investigations regarding the Epstein matter. A lot of this is getting political. I will tell you this much. According to Bloomberg, Thomas Patton, the acting director of OCDETF until September 2025, said he's not surprised by Epstein potentially being involved in transnational crimes. Quote, money laundering is always a part of it, and it's not surprising that it could touch or potentially include Jeffrey Epstein as one of the conspirators. The DEA felt that they needed to inquire about him and connect it into their case. And what that tells me is there's smoke. Now, I want to close this out with some video, okay? So Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche spoke to reporters yesterday after being questioned by lawmakers with the House Oversight Committee. And they kind of went on the defensive about their handling of the Epstein files, like releasing names of victims that shouldn't have been released. Take a look.
Under the Epstein Transparency Act, we had 30 days to redact and release, under the law that was passed, 3 million documents. If you stack those up, that's the height of the Eiffel Tower. No other administration, under the Biden administration, they released 0 documents. So we did our very best to comply with the law. And of course, we don't want any victim to be further victimized. And that's why we had 500 attorneys with the Criminal Division, with the National Security Division, with the FBI working around the clock to do the best we could. I think it was less than 1% error. Todd, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's right. We said from the beginning that any mistakes that were made, and there should be no mistakes. And so when you say lawyers have said something, that's not a fair question, and you know it, because we took pains to protect victims. When when someone identified that there was a victim, we immediately pulled that document down, fixed it, and put it back up.
Immediately.
And so of course we don't ever want to do anything to re-victimize anybody that was victimized by the horrible crimes of Mr. Epstein, and we didn't to the extent that mistakes were made, and there were mistakes made because of the reasons the Attorney General just said. But when they were identified to us, we fixed them immediately.
And by the way, when asked if she's going to submit to a subpoena by the House Oversight Committee for testimony under oath, she said, "I will follow the law." That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.